Within the general sphere of online video game discussion, there's certain opinions and schools of thought that are seemingly viewed as being universally true. Mario 64 is a masterpiece, Valve can't count to 3, and Todd Howard will eventually give the human appendix a use by releasing a port of Skyrim for it. Similarly, it seems like there's a universal consensus on the quality of certain franchises. You know, Zelda good, Bubsy bad, Sonic somewhere horrendous in between. I don't think I'd be breaking any new ground in saying that Nintendo, despite their occasional moments of peculiar decision making and negative press, have a catalogue of franchises that are among those both the internet and industry as a whole hold in massively high regard. Mario, Zelda, Pokemon are all among the names that Nintendo seemingly blots out masterpiece after masterpiece for every time a new entry in the series is released. Almost every time. I say all of this because what I'm about to say may shock you, may rock the very foundations of your fragile little world, may scramble your brains until they resemble nothing but a shapeless tub of goo. Are you sitting down? I certainly hope so, because I'm about to say that I'm not that huge on Metroid. Okay, so I don't dislike Metroid. In fact, far from it. I played and beaten both Other M and Fusion and greatly enjoyed both. And Dread is on my Christmas list for this year as well. So now you're probably sat there thinking, yeah man, what you on about? You just said you don't get massive on Metroid like, but now you're saying you like it. So to that dear gamer I say, pull up a nice comfy chair, grab yourself a cup of tea or a soft drink or a pint of choice and settle yourself in as I regale you with a winter's tale of how I came to actively avoid Metroidvanias. But first, some context. Children's brains are built very different, aren't they? They have one weird or odd or bad experience during their infancy and suddenly, whoops, they don't like Sonic Heroes and can't eat baked cod anymore. I can think of no finer personal example of this than my genuine, crippling fear of E.T. the Extraterrestrial. At this point, I'm sure you're hitting the dislike button, dabbing on me in the comments and absolutely battering me in the quote retweets, but fucking look at him! His massive fingers, peculiar head, his huge extendable neck, which I have a memory of him using to poke out of a cupboard and spit coffee on someone? I genuinely don't even know if this happens in the film or if it was a nightmare I had. I'm genuinely too unnerved by my past experiences with the little bugger to actually check. Regardless, whatever small fraction of that film I did see as a young'un was enough to not only give me recurring nightmares about the little freak, but was enough to make sure that, to this day, I cannot bring myself to watch the film, and it made me incredibly uneasy last year when the BT Christmas advert prominently featured him. Essentially, what I'm saying is that I find it incredibly fascinating how the experiences we have as young children, sometimes incredibly minor or specific, can massively impact how our brains think and how our opinions develop. I was incredibly sick after I ate a strange cod recipe and played Spore on DS, so after that weekend, I avoided both like the plague. I couldn't beat Special Stage 3 in Heroes for a number of years, and that frustration I consistently felt when trying to do it meant my opinion on the game as a whole worsened because of that one flaw. I saw something I didn't like in E.T., and now I need a beer to cope. Basically, kids' brains are weird. All of that brings us back to Christmas Day 2002. Where, after some faffing about on the behalf of my dad and uncle to get it working, I first experienced the joys of playing my brand new PS2 for the first time. I was overjoyed and ecstatic not just to own the console, but to pop in the game I had received with it, which was based on a series I obsessed over for a large portion of my early life. The game in question was Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights. As I established last time we looked at something Scoob related, I have a rather large history with the world's most famous Great Dane, dating back further than I can physically pinpoint myself. You'd expect the experience of playing a game based on something I was so enamoured with to be purely joyous, right? Well, initially, it was. I, prior to getting ready to go to my grand's for lunch, was having a blast, and between the game and the Ace Lightning figures I received that year, I was a pretty happy chappy that Christmas. As the months rolled by, however, and I continued to play the game, I found it harder and harder to progress based on one simple fact. I didn't know where I was going. Prior to this point, all of the games I played, the likes of Monsters Inc. Scare Island and Crash 3, were linear, showing you exactly which level is next, and what you're meant to do in those games can be accomplished by following a path they lay out for you. At first, you'd assume this game would be in a similar vein, as the developer, Heavy Iron Studios, would go on to produce the Incredibles games for home consoles, some other linear Disney games, and probably most famously, Battle for Bikini Bottom, which is also a game with rather linear levels. This wasn't the case with Night of 100 Frights, however, and the more open and explorative design of the map was, understandably, a rather big departure from what 4-year-old me was comfortable with. My usual response at the time, when I wasn't sure what to do to progress in a game, was to start the game over and ensure I listened properly to everything the game told and showed me. But that approach didn't work either. I listened to the story, followed the trails of Scooby Snacks guiding me about, but after a certain point every attempt I'd find myself thinking, what am I meant to do now? Sure, each time I started over I got a little further, but it didn't lead to me beating the game, only serving to further confuse me as to what I was doing wrong, and at times, the progression that came with these retries only came about from me just aimlessly wandering around and getting lucky. After literal years of not being able to make any real progress, I traded the game in, and only after repurchasing it around 2012 did I finally manage to complete it. As you've no doubt guessed, it was this initial confusion that not only served to paint a rather vivid picture of the game in my mind as being surprisingly hard, but also ensured that the concept of non-linearity as a whole was completely tainted for me, and this is something that is still persistent for me to this day. Alongside the likes of Metroid, I'm not too huge on games like Skyrim either, because they serve to feel less open and explorative to me, and more just straight up directionless. Honestly, a more accurate title for this video would probably be Scooby-Doo ruined the concept of non-linearity for me, but that's not quite as catchy, and, you know, you're already here, you've already clicked the video, so, you know. Anyway, let's continue this lovely trip down memory lane together, and examine in a better depth whether my belief that some lunatics really did create a difficult and directionless take on the world of Scoob is true, or whether the experiences I had with the game as a child really have just influenced me that deeply. The story of this one is what I found easiest to grasp as an infant, which, given the context of what I've already discussed, should probably speak volumes. The gang are contacted by one of Daphne's mates, Holly Graham, to Mystic Manor, the home of her uncle and famous inventor, Professor Alexander Graham, who, out of nowhere, has completely vanished. She informs the gang that her uncle disappeared just before he was due to unveil a new invention, and she contacted Mr. Inc. because nobody else will help her look for him because the manor is haunted. Fred, Velma and Daphne accompany Holly into the mansion to begin their search for the academic, with Shaggy and Scooby deciding the mystery machine is the best place for them given the lack of monsters in there. This obviously doesn't last long, as Shaggy falls into a secret tunnel, leaving Scoob all alone. It's now up to Scooby to find his friends and maybe solve the mystery along the way. After exploring the manor for a bit, Scooby discovers that not only are a cornucopia of the gang's past foes roaming the grounds, but that an especially powerful spectre, the Mastermind, is plaguing the premises, claiming that he's the reason that the professor and everybody else has vanished. Scooby then reunites with Velma, looking for her glasses obviously, who tells him that the gang all got separated when they went to the manor before. After she finds her glasses, she freaks out, claiming that the creeper is right behind Scooby before running off, but when Scooby turns around to check, there's nobody there. From here on, Scooby periodically encounters the Mastermind and his friends, helping them to slowly piece together what's going on. Things come to a head in Professor Graham's lab, where Scooby saves Shaggy from being eaten alive by a shark and finally reunites with all of the gang, who put their brains together to hatch a plan to finally defeat the Mastermind, doing so using mirrors to stun him before brutally electrocuting him. The Mastermind is, as is tradition, unmasked and revealed to be Professor Graham himself, who, all things considered, seems rather confused about the whole affair. Velma then uses her big, beautiful brain and her glasses to reveal a fake holographic wall which Holly has been standing behind the entire time. Holly was the one behind it all, intending to get her uncle thrown in jail and then claim credit for his brilliant super hologram device, which she'd been using to create hyper-realistic images of the gang's past foes to patrol the mansion. She created a hologram of herself to accompany the gang while she, as the mastermind, kidnapped and messed with the gang using the professor's dressed for supper suck you upper, which essentially allowed her to travel over large distances via air tunnels, moving around the mansion effectively so she could get from place to place quickly. She'd hid her uncle in the duct nearest to the entrance of the mansion, meaning that if she got bested in the lab, she'd be able to get back here before the gang and hide, while the professor, in a full spare mastermind costume, fell out of the duct and looked like the real deal. The groundskeeper gets a funny jab in about, "Oh, you always blame the groundskeeper." Holly is thrown in jail for her crimes, and Scooby uses the hologram machine to ruse Shaggy with making him think there's a table full of food. Prick. One Scooby-Dooby-Doo later, and it's curtains. The story of this game is pretty in line with what you expect for the series. I like the idea of Holly's plan, something Fred agrees with, and how the game finds an excuse to justify the gang's old foes making a reappearance. Of course, it is pretty obvious that Holly's the mastermind. I mean, there's only 3 characters we see other than the gang, and she's the most present, so you know. That's not much of a problem for me personally though. In fact, the only real issue I've got with the game is how it's paced out. It sounds like a good little story on paper, when it's all together, like I've just explained, but it's paced out over the course of 4 or so hours of gameplay, making it feel a tad disjointed. Of course, there's a couple little scenes of Shaggy here and there to keep it ticking over, and at the end of the day it's a Scooby-Doo game, so I'm not expecting deep plot or a lot of cutscenes. But maybe a couple more scenes featuring the different members of the gang, maybe, I don't know, you run into them at the start of the different areas, even just briefly, would have really helped to connect things just that little bit better. What we do have that connects these story scenes together is our gameplay. Unlike Mystery Mayhem, which I looked at last year, Scooby is our only playable character. He controls pretty nicely, feels responsive while turning and moving, and is perfectly weighty when he jumps, which makes platforming feel very satisfying and fits quite well given his build. Platforming is the name of the game here. Each of the 12 areas the back of the box flaunts is filled with challenges to test Scooby's platforming prowess, so you need to get a handle on how he functions pretty quickly in order to master them. Luckily, you get the opportunity to get to grips with Scooby's controls right from the outset. Straight out of the opening cutscene, there are 4 paths presented to you, but 3 of them, at present, are inaccessible, with the 2 gates either side of Scooby being locked and the most obvious path being the huge mansion ahead of you being walled off due to a device asking you for 50 Scooby snacks. After collecting the snacks lying around the area, you'll find your attention getting caught by a trail of snacks leading you to a 4th unlocked gate. Through this gate is the Mystic Playground, a one-off area which acts not only as an effective movement tutorial, as well as previewing the different types of obstacles you'll come across, but also effectively introduces to you both types of collectible you'll find throughout the adventure, Scooby snacks and monster tokens, placing an abundance of Scooby snacks in each of the obstacles to further emphasize what the snack gate showed you initially about how important the snacks are as a collectible. The monster token you find in this area, on the other hand, is introduced as a one-off reward for completing a small platforming challenge, establishing its rarity compared to the far more common but necessary Scooby snacks. These tokens are an entirely optional but excellent collectible. Essentially, all of the enemies in this game are classic Scooby villains, starting you off with the likes of zombies, werewolves, the witches, and progressing to feature iconic names like the Creeper, Tar Monster, Captain Cutler, and I was gonna say I was glad that he was frozen in there and that we're out here, but now that the sheriff's on the loose, I don't quite feel so secure. This rogues gallery typically is separated into enemies who use projectiles, enemies who rush you, and enemies who'll just sort of wander around. A couple more notable ghouls, however, are also given the treatment of being bosses, the Black Knight, Green Ghost, and Captain Redbeard being the ones chosen for these more complicated encounters. The monsters meddling around the manor, though, are also linked to the monster tokens. Essentially, if you find one, you can take it over here to the monster gallery to view their model, find out what episode they appear in, and even answer some trivia questions about the show as a whole. Being honest, I never go to collect all of the tokens myself, but as a collectible, I really enjoy the idea of them a lot. They feel like a proper meaty reward for going out of your way to grab them. Oh yeah, speaking of collectibles, clues aren't a thing in this game. Every other Scooby-Doo game uses them as collectibles, but here they're just the equivalent of hint bubbles. It's nice to see them still featured, but not as cool as how they're used in the future games. Honestly, this time around I found myself looking at this introductory segment of the game quite fondly. Yeah, it's basic, but I don't know, I just thought when recording footage that this was a really nice and effective few minutes to open the game up, effectively showing you the different places you'll be exploring, as well as giving you the freedom and safety to get confident with the controls and gain an understanding of the different obstacles before encountering them proper, all while establishing both types of collectible as being important yet special for different reasons. Following this nice little introduction, you get the chance to put these skills to the test in a brief section of Mystic Manor, meeting up with Holly and exploring an additional room before being told, "You can't come here yet, you can't break spider webs," which is a sign of things to come. Upon going back outside and chatting with the groundskeeper, you receive your first power-up, a shovel which you can use on context-sensitive spots, these flowers, to dig for buried treasure. This is one of many different power-ups you'll find around the map, which bolsters Scoob's initially limited moveset. To begin with, Scooby can jump, which can squash smaller enemies, run, and charge into larger foes, but this maneuver will only stun enemies. Alongside the shovel, as you progress, you'll gain access to items which will expand Scooby's skills, such as slippers and a lampshade to sneak past and hide from enemies, which is later upgraded into a Black Knight helmet which lets you move while you're hiding, springs which give you a double jump, a football helmet that kills enemies instead of just stunning them, a ground pound and an upgrade for it that lets off a shockwave which stuns enemies, suction cups and banana flavoured wellies which let you climb up slippery surfaces and move normally on sticky surfaces respectively, an umbrella to help you glide and ride updrafts, and lastly, the chewing gum and soap bubbles, two projectiles which don't damage enemies but instead turn them into platforms, with the gum holding them in place so you can bounce off their heads like a trampoline, and a soap bubble ensnaring them and turning them into platforms you can stand on and jump off of. I like with these upgrades though how the focus is less on having Scooby be able to take down monsters more easily and more so on him being able to have more ways to move around or traverse the environment. Yeah, there are a couple combat based upgrades, but when the combat is literally just run into enemy or ground pound enemy, then there's no reason to focus on that, and I enjoy how the game recognises this and goes for a more platforming and movement focus for them. Of course, as the game is a Metroidvania, you'll be finding or earning these upgrades as you progress through areas and defeat bosses. Sometimes you'll be following a path and at the end of it, there's no way to a later area, but instead just a dead end with a power-up. Usually, next to where you find said power-up, there'll be a shortcut back to the central mystery machine area, but after that, it's up to you to remember where to go now that you have this new skill. This is what put me off the game as a child. The fact that the game, after seeming mostly like it's going to be a linear romp, even going as far as to name the different parts of areas as Part 1, Part 2, etc., suddenly pivots to being non-linear, served to provide no end of confusion to me when I was younger. Was I doing something wrong? Did I not collect something? Did I skip an area? It was a very tough adaptation for me, which I ultimately failed to make, and as I said previously, led to me viewing the game as this deceptively difficult experience which wasn't fit for its target audience. Looking at it now, however, as a grown man who likes beer and action figures, the idea of the game being designed in this way isn't so much of an issue to me. I like the way it encourages exploration of the map to get back to the area you can use your new power-up in, and going back to prior areas to solve previously unsolvable conundrums is pretty satisfying. This isn't to say I still don't have some issues with the game's design just because I understand it better now. It's still rather irksome to me that the game expects you to remember incredibly specific and sometimes inconspicuous parts of areas which can be between 1 and 3 segments long. Yes, usually these areas are at the start or ends of segments, so you can just use warp gates which you activate at the end of different levels to get to them, but on certain occasions they're rather difficult to recall where you need to be or even recognize that something needs to be used on them in the first place. Like these planks, for instance. Yes, they look different to the others, but after traveling through loads and loads of different areas, I'm supposed to remember that these specific planks are the ones I need to smash through. Sure, you've got a map to help you navigate, but when there's an entire part of the map comprised of sub-areas with different seaside puns as their names, it can be pretty difficult to remember where exactly you need to head next. It also doesn't help that some of the power-ups are pretty easy to miss, like last time I played, I completely bypassed the slippers and lampshade because I just forgot to get them until I already had the knight's helmet, meaning that they were completely obsolete already. Even when recording for this playthrough of the game, I'd completely forgotten to grab the suction cups, meaning that I had to first remember where they were and then go back through one of the levels I'd already completed because I'd missed one room I had to go into to grab them. I think part of the reason for this, aside from my own ignorance, is the fact that the levels are all sequenced, and as a result, certain areas do blend together after a little bit. Honestly though, those, alongside some pretty lacking boss fights, are my only real gripes with the gameplay and design of this game. The platforming is appropriately challenging and escalates nicely, segments with Shaggy help to keep things fresh and mix up gameplay well, and the way that you use your power-ups to help you navigate the map is super satisfying. Yeah, certain map areas do blend together and the bosses aren't the best, but aside from that, I always found myself engaged while I was playing, which is certainly more than I can say than when I was younger. Usually at this point in any of my videos, I'd pivot to talking about the music of the game, but actually I'd like to take the time this time to discuss not just the music, but the presentation of the game as a whole, as I think it's one of its best aspects. Much like Mystery Mayhem, the game strives to present itself as if it's an episode of the show. Whereas Mystery Mayhem gave off vibes more akin to What's New Scooby-Doo, however, this game tries to stick much more closely to the original few series, specifically taking a lot from Scooby-Doo Where Are You and the New Scooby-Doo show, the latter of which has its theme remixed for waterfront areas. The music honestly feels ripped straight out of an episode of Where Are You. It's a really well done score, which does a good job of both fitting the vibe of this iteration of the show specifically, while also feeling suitably video gamey. Of course, I can't speak about the soundtrack of the game without mentioning the stellar boss themes there. Well, just take a listen for yourself.
Scooby-Doo, what you gonna do? The next villain is on to you. Evil pirates and flying swords rule the day.
Mwah! Perfection! This was the perfect way to represent the chase songs found in Where Are You, turning the style of music you'd hear when Shaggy and Scooby encounter the monster in the show into themes you hear when you experience boss encounters with the monsters. Pure genius. Beyond featuring classic villains and musical stylings though, the game goes even further than its contemporaries to really capture the feel of classic Scoob, using sound effects that feel right at home in any of the early shows for the different actions Scoob performs. For his jumps, a springy sound effect. For his charge move, a running sound effect reminiscent of older cartoons. And of course, there's a laugh track that occasionally plays during both cutscenes and during gameplay when you perform certain actions or interact with certain objects.
Jumbo shrimp, Runa sushi.
It's something you'd think would get irritating, but it's really not the case, and it works as a perfect addition to really add some authenticity to the great vibe the game already exudes. In fact, the only sound effect that gets semi-irritating is the snack collection sound, as you'll be hearing it a lot given the amount of snacks you'll need by game's end. Aside from that though, I wholeheartedly appreciate everything the game does to match the vibe of the series the best it can, and while I do still think Mystery Mayhem still feels the most like a Scooby-Doo game, where it feels like you're living through a series of interconnected episodes which all capture the vibe of the show really well, I think this game feels more akin to experiencing a full singular episode of one of the original series, extending the parts of the episode where, usually, Shaggy and Scooby explore the location and encounter the fiends. Only this time, obvs, Scoob flies solo and he's exploring a bunch of different but interconnected places. This game's honestly something that every time I revisit it and the years go by, I grow fonder and fonder of. Through its gameplay and presentation, I think it does really begin to punch above its own weight, and it's a game which is not only, I think, pretty impressive as an early PS2 game, but also, like Mystery Mayhem, does an incredible job of fitting in with the source material while paying homage to it excellently. It's gone from something that legitimately impacted my taste in games in a quite negative way, which is still something, as I said, I'm working on getting over to this day, to something I can appreciate for the exact thing that made me feel upset when I was younger, with the design of the game now being something I genuinely really like about it. Is it the finest Metroidvania out there? I don't know, man. I'm not the person to ask about that. I like Other M, remember? Is it a fun Metroidvania though? I certainly think so. So while it may have upset me to no end as an idiot infant, I'm pretty happy to say that after a pretty long time, much like Sonic Heroes and Baked Cod, I've come to be able to appreciate the game for what it is, and have been able to outgrow the silly biases that my baby boy brain invented for me to hold against the game way back when. Still won't watch ET though. Guy's fucking creepy.